Say Halloween. Hey, say Halloween.
This is the worst.
Welcome into the worst fantasy show. I am your host with the least, Jack Lucenay. I'm here wishing you a very happy Halloween. But we will, without any further ado, get right into today's fantasy matchups. So yes, of course, you may notice we are going live early because of Halloween. Just wanting to get it out of the way so that I can enjoy my night, which actually is a night off. But also, we'll be able to cover the Thursday night matchup a little more in depth. So let's get started right away. The Houston Texans at the New York Jets, a 42-point over-under. And actually some fantasy action to be had in this game. On the Texans side, I am definitely still playing Joe Mixon. He's been a top 3 running back in fantasy in points per game. So regardless of the matchup, and the Jets, honestly, if there's one way to attack the defense, it's easier to attack them through the run. So I actually like Joe Mixon a lot tonight. I'm not really bullish on Tank Dell or CJ Stroud personally. I do think this presents as a bad matchup, a road matchup on Thursday night. Unless you have incredible options, you are probably playing CJ Stroud and Tank Dell. I've kind of avoided them. And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I should take some stacks just to be safe. But this is one of those games that I'm glad is on the Thursday docket, so it's not on the main slate to muddle things up. But as far as who I would actually play, for me, again, Joe Mixon, trying to avoid even Stroud and Dell this week in simple redraft leagues like 10 to 12 men if I have really better options. On the Jets side, it's kind of the same thing. It's the familiar faces, Aaron Rodgers in a pinch. Because he has Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams. I think both are startable here. And Breece Hall. I think where it gets interesting in kind of deep dart DFS plays, like, I was throwing together a lineup on Owner's Box. Shout out to my guy Disco. And if you guys ever sign up to Owner's Box where you can do like the salary type DFS plays, use the code Disco and it'll do the whole price match thing. And it really helps him out. But what I was getting at is I plugged in both tight ends as really cheap options. I think they're both playable, Dalton Schultz and Tyler Conklin, respectively, for the Houston Texans and for the New York Jets. If you're in a 16-team kind of league or deeper, or again, as just a really cheap option as a DFS dart throw, I don't hate those guys. But otherwise, I think, again, it's just familiar faces on both sides here. Moving on to the Sunday 1 o'clock games, starting with one of the games of the week. And I will say, just as a side comment, I'm really happy about this slate of games in particular. I forgot to mention off the top, the San Francisco 49ers and the Steelers are on bye week. And when I was looking through these games, and, just to give you a glimpse into how I prep the show, which is very little, I basically just write the matchups and, slot them into their time slot. And then I color code them green, yellow, or red. I think it's pretty obvious what those mean. Green is good, yellow is meh, red is bad. Only one matchup on this slate of main games came up red for me. And we'll get to that later. It's the Patriots at Titans. But otherwise, I feel like there's a lot of juicy action this week. And so we'll start again with probably one of my favorite matchups of the week, Cowboys at Falcons. Kirk Cousins always feels like he does a little bit better when it's on a Sunday afternoon. and hopefully Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb can keep up. So I think this could be a high-scoring game. I think this is a game where you can get in some auxiliary options in the receiving side of things. I don't want the running backs on the Cowboys side. If Rico Dowdle plays, I'm okay spot starting him, but I would prefer a lot of other options. The Falcons' run defense is actually decent. If Dowdle's out, I'm not messing with Zeke and Dalvin Cook and this mixture of. This is like that era of Baltimore Ravens running backs when they just had a bunch of names like Le'Veon Bell, but nobody was actually good for fantasy. So I would start, obviously, Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb are just weekly starters. Jake Ferguson as a tight end is in your lineup. And I do like Jalen Tolbert here. I think he's emerging as the true wide receiver 2 for this team, and they're going to need him in this game. I mean, he's seen, it feels like at least 3 receptions per game, but I think he has a little bit higher ceiling against the Falcons here. And on the Falcons side, again, this is very easy. It's Kirk Cousins, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson, all in plus matchups. I think if you're really desperate for a running back, I think you can play Tyler Algier as a running back 3 flex play. Like, don't play him ahead of most starters. But if you're starting to talk about secondary and tertiary options, I actually think Tyler Algier is potentially a nice play here. The Denver Broncos at the Baltimore Ravens with a 45.5 point over-under. Now, Lamar has suddenly popped up with injuries that he's managing and dealing with from his last game. If God forbid Lamar Jackson misses this game, I'm out completely. On the Ravens side, I want Derrick Henry obviously is going to be in your lineup, but I'm going to temper my expectations. I'm not even 100% sure who is the backup quarterback for the Ravens right now. I think it's Devin Leary is his name, because I know it's not Snoop Huntley anymore. But yeah, no, if Lamar were to sit, you play Derrick Henry and nobody else. If Lamar is in, I think you can play Zay Flowers. Deontay's not going to be able to play in this game, and if he does, it's not going to be to full capacity. I don't mind Mark Andrews. Now I have low shares, but I have a couple Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews stacks going in my best ball just in case. But it's about 10% shares, or maybe even a little bit less. Because honestly, I think Lamar is truly questionable for this game in the sense that they may not feel like they need him to beat the Broncos at home. On the Broncos side, I mean, you start Bo Nix and you start Cortland Sutton. This feels like a game where people are going to try and sit Javonte Williams, and he's going to have a decent day if he just plops into the red zone. I think you would have to have, again, looking at the previous matchup, Tyler Algier versus Javonte Williams, I think is an interesting conversation. And I personally still land on the Javonte Williams gross volume Robitussin player side of it. I think he will outscore Tyler Algier potentially still just by being the starter in name. And especially if this turns into a game where all of a sudden Lamar Jackson is out, I actually prefer Javonte Williams even that little bit more. I have taken some deep shots on Bo Nix. I think a naked Bo Nix play is fine here. If you're really forced into it because you're just dealing with injuries or depth concerns, like I have a 16-team league where Cortland Sutton will be starting for me. But generally speaking, I think I would rather avoid the Broncos in fantasy. It feels like you're probably like a 2-5 or at this point, 2-6 or 3-5 team, kind of trying to manage the ship to shore if you're really struggling with Broncos players' decisions. All right, let's move on to one of the other juiciest matchups of the week. The Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills in a divisional matchup, 49.5-point over-under. This is a start everyone game for me. This is Tua's in, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are in, Devon Achane is in. I think you can even start Raheem Mostert. I'm not bullish enough to start Jonnu Smith unless this was like a really, again, if I'm just looking for that, $3,500 option as the last option to squeeze into my DFS lineup, or I'm in a 16 to 32 team league or some kind of ridiculous thing. That's the only way where Jonnu Smith is an actual starting option. So you limit yourself to the starters. On the Bills side, though, Keon Coleman, I got to say, I was not enamored with this kid like everybody else was coming into the season in terms of what I thought his fantasy production would be as the number one wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. And I actually thought that Josh Allen would regress because I did not see Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel as a collection of wide receivers worthy of elevating his passing game, which had actually kind of regressed over the last couple of years, especially the last year. You look at Josh Allen's passing stats, everything was down except interceptions, which were crazy up. So I was very scared for Josh Allen coming into this year, and I think Amari Cooper definitely changes things for them. I think Amari Cooper is a true number one wide receiver, but I think that really opens things up for Keon Coleman. You look at the last 2 weeks of Keon Coleman, he has been actually decently consistent. And the thing is, like, yeah, it's deep shots, but again, it's like, well, all of a sudden now you're dealing with actual problems of on 3 levels, you have to cover Amari Cooper and Dalton Kincaid and James Cook out of the backfield. And now all of a sudden, as opposed to having to deal with that number one quarterback, you look at Keon Coleman is now finding himself matched up against a defensive back 2 and able to take advantage and finding those creases and openings downfield. And Josh Allen has the cannon to find him downfield. So I actually have some Keon Coleman plays this week, even in my DFS lineups and my best ball lineups. But I think Keon Coleman is playable this week in deeper leagues. I actually would even consider playing him above Amari Cooper right now because I feel like Amari Cooper is still even though he's a true number one, he's still finding his way with this team. Obviously, you don't just get traded to a team in the middle of a season and not have to learn A, chemistry with the quarterback, B, the playbook, C, the coaches. Like there's a lot he's having to pick up on the fly. Now, I think to his benefit, this is something Amari Cooper has done before in his career. So I do think that he is capable of, again, kind of already being on the field and being a factor. But I think, again, the way that it really changes this offense is how all of a sudden you have Keon Coleman on that other outside as the X receiver, and then you have Khalil Shakir just dominating in the slot right now. And now you've got problems because now all of a sudden, again, Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir as secondary and third looks are getting tons and tons of value right now. And as soon as they start to try and cover those guys, now all of a sudden, Amari Cooper and Dalton Kincaid are going to have some good games. So I think Amari Cooper really unlocks a lot of what the Bills want to do on offense, especially through their passing game. But I think it benefits Keon Coleman. So I've been picking him up in a lot of places where I saw him on waivers, even in shallower leagues. And again, I'm not necessarily playing him above high-level options, but I have leagues where I'm dealing with, like everybody, it's been a fucking massacre this year in terms of injuries. And I know I'm dealing with injuries across the board. I'm in 26 leagues. 13, at least half of them are decimated, if not more. So Keon Coleman is absolutely a starting option for me in a lot of those leagues. Again, above, I'll start Keon Coleman over every Patriots wide receiver right now. Let me tell you that much. So yeah, let's just, again, Dolphins starters, obviously, and Bills starters, Allen, Kincaid, You can even throw in Amari Cooper and hope for the touchdown, but I would still temper expectations. I think Khalil Shakir is a strong PPR play and even a DFS play. And I like Keon Coleman, like I just talked about. And then obviously James Cook is in as well. All right, let's move on. The New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers. 43.5-point over-under here. Derek Carr supposedly will be back from the oblique injury, which I think is good. I actually was kind of looking forward to another game of the Rattler Snake and sexy Jake Hayner because I have been drafting a lot of Chris Olave again in my best ball lineups, and I like Chris Olave a lot this week, but I think I actually liked him more with the rookies because it just feels like they were peppering the number one wide receiver, which is Chris Olave. 14 targets last week. They weren't the greatest, but again, I don't know that Derek Carr is necessarily just going to come back from injury and pepper him with 14 targets like that. Now, I'm hoping, and I think a lot of people are hoping that because Rashid Shaheed is out, that kind of the great game we saw week one against the Panthers where they ran it up on them and, Kamara dealing with his own issues and injuries maybe doesn't have such a huge game. Maybe it is a big Olave game. And I am banking on that again with a lot of my DFS plays. I'm overweight right now on Olave. I have 29% of him in best ball. So I do like the play. As a deeper play, I mean, obviously Alvin Kamara is in your lineup. I'm not messing with Derek Carr in his first game back. I think I limit myself here to Olave, Alvin Kamara, and in deeper formats, Taysom Hill. Just the dart throw that maybe this is the week that he gets the rushing touchdowns, and against the Panthers, that's a pretty good bet. On the Panthers side, I mean, if you have Chuba Hubbard, you start Chuba Hubbard. You start him as an RB2. I think for the wide receivers, again, very deep leagues, you'd have to be in dynasty formats, 16 teams, 12 to 16 teams or deeper. I think both Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette are interesting plays this week. I think Bryce Young, if you're desperate in a super flex as a quarterback too, is an interesting play this week. Now, the problem is this is such a good slate of games. I don't know that I'm going to find my way to actually start them in any capacity because the only quarterback plays I'm looking at just off the top of my head that I would start them over, I mean, even Bo Nix to me would be above the level of the quarterbacks in this game. So I would actually start Bo Nix ahead of both Derek Carr and Bryce Young. I look at Gardner Minshew for the Raiders, who Antonio, shout out Dan Hansis of it's now called Heed the Call through Underdog, hilariously enough. But they had the theory first of Antonio Pierce, the head coach of the Raiders, just generally does not like the personality of Gardner Minshew. And I think that's part of why it's not working for him, especially. But I would start, I think, Bryce Young over Derek Carr, over Gardner Minshew level quarterbacks, maybe over Daniel Jones, because I think the Commanders' defense is for real and one to be avoided now after what I've seen for the last few weeks, over Jacoby Brissett. It's really those gross level quarterbacks that you'll find in two quarterback or super flex leagues where he's an option. But otherwise, I mean, again, super dart throws on Legette and on Jalen Coker. But really, I'm just trying to start Chuba Hubbard and nobody else. Speaking of Minshew and the Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders at the Cincinnati Bengals. 46.5-point over under here. I think that's generous. I think the Raiders suck right now. I actually think the Raiders might be the worst offense. I'm going to be precise. I'm going to say offense because the defense is still good. The defense is what's keeping them in games. but this offense is horrendous. When Jacoby Myers is your primary weapon, and I love Jacoby Myers as a person and a player, and I think he's had a rough stretch of his career having to play in New England in this version of the Raiders. But we've seen before when Jacoby Myers is your primary weapon, like I'm pretty sure not even Tom Brady could make that team work. It was the Patriots with Jacoby Myers as the primary wide receiver. And again, like Tom Brady himself, the GOAT of GOATs in the NFL, could not make that shit work. So no, I don't think the Raiders with Gardner Minshew are going to make it work. Brock Bowers is an obvious, flaming tire on the very top of the pile of flaming tires that burns brighter than all the rest. I guess you start Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers in PPR leagues, and that's it. I mean, you can't mess with the running backs here. And on the Bengals side, I mean, it's just very obvious. For me, this is Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. Now, where I kind of get in the question, I think I would start Chase Brown, but not Zach Moss. If they're both healthy, I think Brown, the explosivity, I'm in on that. Zach Moss, if he plops into the end zone, I'm okay to miss that. I would even just move on from him, try to trade him or move on from him in general and see if I can't find some more explosive options. But I like Chase Brown just fine. And I think the only question here is if T. Higgins plays, then you can play T. Higgins, obviously. If he does not play, though, I think Mike Gesicki, if you're desperate at tight end, he's playable when Higgins is out. It seems to correlate. The Los Angeles Chargers, I feel like every time I say that, I have to mentally, really force myself to not say San Diego. But the Los Angeles Chargers at the Cleveland Browns. Jameis Winston, the savior of the Cleveland Browns in our fantasy hopes and dreams. Start everybody. Seriously. I think the way that Justin Herbert has been throwing the ball lately and the way the Chargers have kind of changed up their game plan, this I think could turn into a secret shootout. Because I think on the surface, you look at both of these teams and the historicity and the mantra and the personality of both teams and what they want to be is tough-nosed, defensive-minded, run-heavy teams, right? You're talking about the Browns and the Chargers, and yet both of these teams have found themselves meandering into this, high-flying, air it out offense. You've got Justin Herbert suddenly, unleashing the ball 30 plus times a game. And Jameis Winston, again, lack of a running game. Jerome Ford still dealing with injuries, and Nick Chubb working his way back from the devastating injury last year, averaging 2 yards a carry. It's a nice story, but it's not helping the offense. So I think actually, again, this is a secret shootout. I think this is potentially high-yielding fantasy points. So I would start Jameis Winston, David Njoku, who keep an eye out on him, though he suddenly popped up, did not practice. That's scary. But if he practices on Friday, even in limited capacity, and if he plays, he's in for me. Jerry Jeudy, I think, is playable. I think even Elijah Moore has been resurrected. If you're in a 16-team league and he's just sitting there on waivers and you're just I need to plug a wide receiver hole, you can go to him. And I think the new hotness, Cedric Tillman, again, I would have to be in extremely deep circumstances. I think that's still more of a wait and see. I think last game was a little bit fluky. If he shows to have a consistent target share and be more of a utilized part of the offense this week, I think you can start to go to it. But I think Cedric Tillman, as much as I like that player, having not really done much for basically his entire career and then popping for one game, I'm not chasing those points. I would like to throw him on the bench and see how he does, but I think Jerry Jeudy as the primary here, and especially if Njoku misses, he's an exceptional play. I think Elijah Moore is kind of a dirty, gross Robitussin play. But really, like Jameson, Winston, and Njoku are the hot plays here. And I would avoid the running backs. And then on the Chargers side, now all of a sudden Ladd McConkey is questionable. He's been dealing with injuries all year, though. He's obviously coming off his best game. And I think they just need him. So I think you can play him. I'm not playing the other wide receivers. I really think this is just very easily Justin Herbert, Ladd McConkey, J.K. Dobbins, and then keep an eye on Disley, who's also dealing with an injury, it seems like, but that could just be veterans rest because he's been dealing with so many targets. But obviously, if he plays, having been dealing with so many targets and, tight end landscape being what it is, he is a startable asset. All right. The Washington Commanders at the New York Giants. This is a 43.5 point over under. I'm avoiding the Giants. I'm even trying to find ways to bench Malik Neighbors in really shallow leagues, especially if they're standard or half point PPR. The Commanders' defense has been for real, especially like the last couple of weeks. I thought maybe they could get into some shootouts. No, Commanders' defense has just been clamping down on people, and the Giants' offensive line has been an absolute sieve. They gave up 8 sacks to the Eagles. They are getting massacred. Daniel Jones just is not it. Again, Tyrone Tracy potentially could miss this game. He's in concussion protocol. That's something to monitor. If he plays, I would play him because he's been so good. But I would very much limit my expectations because, again, this Commanders defense has been lights out as of late. So I would try as much as possible to avoid all of the Giants' options. If I have to, I'm playing Neighbors and whichever one of the running backs, like if both running backs are in, I don't even think I want to play Tracy unless I just have no other options. But theoretically speaking, like if Tracy misses, I do think Devin Singletary is just, again, gross volume. I have to do this play. Like Devin Singletary over Justice Hill. Okay. On the Commander side, Jaden Daniels practicing in limited fashion. I do think he will play. I don't know that he runs as much, and I don't know that they need him to. I actually think they're going to lean on the running backs here, so I really like Brian Robinson as a play. I really like even Austin Eckler as a play. Terry McLaurin, you play him week in, week out. Zach Ertz as a gross, again, deep option at tight end if you just need a floor. But that's it. Even though the Giants are horrendous on offense and a great matchup for defensive streamers, if the Commanders' defense is out there for some reason, then, play them. But the Giants' defense is just good enough to keep this a low-scoring game. So I really would try to play just Terry McLaurin, Brian Robinson, and maybe Austin Eckler in a pinch as like a deep handcuff. And we get to the red and grossest game of the week. This is the last one on the Sunday 1 o'clock slates. It is the New England Patriots at the Tennessee Titans. 38 point over under here. Ramondre Stevenson and Tony Pollard, if he plays. Moving on. I'm joking, but I'm also extremely serious. Hunter Henry, if you're desperate for a tight end. Calvin Ridley, I guess, if you're just really brave, but I hate this game so much. I really want to avoid it as much as possible. I would play the 2 running backs. And deep super flex, if you're really hurting, I guess you can play like Mason Rudolph. I wouldn't mess with Will Levis if he starts. If Levis starts, I'd play Patriots defense, even though they're on the road. This is just a bad matchup, bad for fantasy. Again, Ramondre, Tony Pollard, move on. Let's go back. Let's not go back. Let's go forward to the 4 o'clock Sunday games. The Chicago Bears at the Arizona Cardinals. 44.5 over under here. I think this is a pretty juicy game. For the Cardinals, though, it is a really tough defensive matchup, even though they are at home. So I'm limiting myself to the starters. I am wanting to start Kyler Murray, MHJ, Trey McBride, James Conner, end of list. I'm not messing with the auxiliary options of a Michael Wilson or a Greg Dortch. On the Bears side, I'm kind of in the same realm. I think this could be a big DJ Moore week. I'm hoping it is. Maybe that's wish casting because I have so much of him in my season long stuff and my redraft stuff. But I have taken a couple shots of him in best ball this week on the weeklies, just maybe even trying to again, wish it into existence. But I think this is a great matchup. So it could be a big DJ Moore week if Caleb Williams shows up and has a big week. I think Caleb Williams is a potential streaming option here. So I like Caleb. I like DJ Moore. I like Keenan Allen. Now, I was looking at the schedule, and I'll talk about it later. I don't like Roma Dunes in this game, but I like him as a stash. And then Cole Kmet, I think, is just worth a dart throw at tight end because of what he can offer you on his spike weeks, and his floors are basically the same as every other tight end you're starting anyways. So I think he is startable, and DeAndre Swift has been smashing, so you start him. The Jacksonville Jaguars at the Philadelphia Eagles, 45.5 over under. The Jaguars are decimated. They've lost Christian Kirk. I don't think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to play. I don't even think Gabe Davis is going to play. So I don't want to start Trevor Lawrence. This is actually a week. The Eagles defense is really, they can get after you. If they smell blood in the water, this could turn bad for the Jaguars. I would try to avoid playing the Jaguars except for Evan Ingram, who's going to see just crazy volume at the tight end position. And I mean, Travis Etienne supposedly should be back for this game, and I don't want to play him. This is a bad matchup for the run. I think Travis Etienne, if he's in, I don't even want to play Tank Bigsby. I think I might even just avoid both players. Now, if Etienne misses another week, I'll still play Tank Bigsby just based on pure volume. But I'm really trying to avoid the Jaguars here. I've got the Evan Ingram shares, and that's about it. On the Eagles side, though, this is a smash matchup. So you just start everybody. I don't think Dallas Goedert's going to be back for this game, but obviously Jalen Hurts, Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, in. Let's keep it rolling. The Detroit Lions at the Green Bay Packers, 48 over under. Jordan Love is insisting that he is going to play. I don't know if I believe him. I really hope that he plays because that would make this game a lot more fun. But I actually think that Malik Willis has been obviously a pleasant surprise in this system. I think, Matt LaFleur, the Flower, he's been exceptional. I think he deserves consideration as coach of the year, does Matt LaFleur. And by the way, the actual pronunciation of his name is Lafleur. I can do it right. I'm from Quebec. But it's funny to me that you guys just go Lafleur. Anyways, yeah. Mathieu Lafleur. That's how it's actually pronounced. There you go. Mathieu Lafleur, le coach. No, what's coach again? I'm forgetting the official French word for coach, but that's all right. Anyways, start your Detroit Lions. I think you just start everybody and you hope it's their day. Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta, Jameson is still out for this game. So Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta, Jared Goff, David Montgomery, and Jahmyr Gibbs are all in your lineup. And on the Packers side, if Jordan Love misses, I would play Malik Willis as kind of a naked super flex quarterback to play. Again, I'm not necessarily looking to stack him with anybody, but I'm just like, I'll throw him in my lineup. And just, he's been decent. He's, again, if I'm looking down the barrel of All the tertiary options I mentioned earlier for quarterback, especially like, Jacoby Brissett level. Again, this isn't super flex, like Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, that kind of thing. I would just play Malik Willis, to be perfectly honest, above those guys. Josh Jacobs is already cleared. He should be a great play here. I actually think that, especially whether Jordan Love plays or not, I think they're really going to lean on Josh Jacobs, and they've been doing that now the last couple of weeks. So I have a decent amount of Josh Jacobs in my best ball lineups. I think he's a great play this week. So I really love Josh Jacobs kind of no matter what, regardless of who the quarterback is. I think it's the receiving options. I think I would play Jaden Reed and hope for the best, but I'm not playing anybody else from the wide receiver room if it's Malik Willis. If it's Jordan Love, you can take your dart throws on Dontavian Wicks, but honestly, more often than not, it hasn't worked. Same with Christian Watson, to be honest. Like Jaden Reed has kind of been the guy, the go-to. So he's the one that I'm betting on. And I actually think the tight end, Tucker Kraft, I think he's slowly turning into like the secret primary, but not actually. It's just the fact that like both quarterbacks like to utilize the tight end. So I think if Love is out, Malik Willis, Tucker Kraft, and Josh Jacobs. If Love is, and even Jaden Reed, but I don't like that one. I think it's better if it's Love in and then Jaden Reed, and then Tucker Kraft, and then Josh Jacobs still. But yeah, let's just move on. The Los Angeles Rams at the Seattle Seahawks. This is probably one of the other best matchups of the week. The Rams suddenly have all their wide receivers back. You start Puka, you start Cooper Kupp. You just hope that they do what they do. Matt Stafford is now back to being an absolute startable quarterback. You can stream him. I think Kyron Williams obviously has been like, he's literally been the most consistent fantasy asset this year. And at running back, to have that just every single week, he has had at least a touchdown. I think that streak continues here. So obviously Kyron Williams is going to continue to be in your lineup. I think Demarcus Robinson, and again, shout out to Jason Moore of the Fantasy Footballers. He's really the one that presents as the wide receiver 3 when Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are in. So I think Demarcus Robinson in a pinch, if you're down bad or in deeper leagues, he is startable. Whereas like now I'm fading Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington and these other guys. Tyler Brown, I think, was the other one. And I'm really just, I think Demarcus Robinson, you can start him and hope he finds the end zone. And I'm fading Colby Parkinson at this point too, because he was dependent on volume. And if you are ceding that volume to the actual superstar wide receivers like you should be, he becomes much less relevant. On the Seahawks side, DK Metcalf is still not practicing, so monitor that. He's hoping to return to practice. I think either it was supposed to be today or tomorrow. I still think he's going to miss this game. So I think even though it was disappointing last week, you can spot start JSN and Tyler Lockett and even Noah Fant. I think Geno Smith has just been so consistent that unless you have an incredible option to replace him with, and in most super flex leagues, you're going to be starting him. And I think you start Ken Walker. It seems like he's cleared to play now. He's been dealing with like injuries and illness. I had stashed Zach Charbonnet in a couple spots, but it seems like Ken Bone is good to go. So you should be able to play Ken Walker, and that's about it. All right. Sunday night matchup, Sunday night football between the Indianapolis Colts at the Minnesota Vikings, 46.5 point over under. But this is suddenly a much more exciting game because the Colts have decided to bench Anthony Richardson, much to the chagrin of, fantasy couch wizards out there that believe that Anthony Richardson should gain his experience by getting absolutely slaughtered in NFL games. I tend to disagree. I'm not going to get into all that right now. Let's just get into who we would start here, which for the Colts, everybody. I know the Vikings have been a tough defense, but it feels like as of late, quarterbacks that are able to take advantage of the blitz have been able to take advantage of the Vikings. And Joe Flacco, being a veteran quarterback, will be able to take advantage of the blitz in my estimation. The Colts running game and their offensive line, I think, is just good enough to keep Minnesota a little bit on their heels. I would start Josh Downs with confidence. I would start Michael Pittman. I would start Joe Flacco. Obviously, you're starting Jonathan Taylor, and I don't want to start him, but I'm at the point now where if it's Joe Flacco for the rest of the year, not Alec Pierce, but Adonai Mitchell has been quietly good at, running wind sprints and doing not much with it because he's not getting targeted. But if he starts to get targeted, if he kind of hits that rookie boost down the back half of the season, I think he could be like a nice little spot start for you. So he's someone that I'm stashing. On the Vikings side, this is, again, you start all your assets here. Sam Darnold is in. Justin Jefferson is in. I think Jordan Addison is worth a flex, and you hope that it's a boom game for him. I think Aaron Jones is in your lineup. The only question for me is TJ Hawkinson, if I want to play him in his first game back. If I have a true viable tight end option. So, shout out my friend Raph. He hit me up and was asking, should I start TJ Hawkinson or Sam Laporta? I was like, okay. It's his first week back. Even if it's wrong, I'm going to play Sam Laporta. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'll be happy because then it means Hawkinson comes back and is immediately a tight end one option. But the chances are smaller that happens. That's not being realistic. I think it's more realistic that he comes back and just, if he has a decent game of like 4 for 40, like, people will be happy for him. And you might not necessarily be happy for your fantasy lineup. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But if you have like really crap options, like, if you're in the land of Colby Parkinson's and Tyler Conklin's and that kind of thing, then I could see starting TJ Hawkinson, especially if it's in a deeper league. All right, we got one more matchup, and then we got a question in the comments here that I'll get to before we get into our streaming options of the week. Monday Night Football. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Kansas City Chiefs, a 45.5 point over-under. This could have been such a great game. Unfortunately, obviously with the injuries to the Buccaneers wide receivers, we're getting a watered down version of the Bucs. I think they can still do some things, but I can tell you, in a single quarterback league, Kirk Cousins was on waivers, and I, said a little prayer to the fantasy gods because I was able to pick him up. And also be starting him ahead of Baker Mayfield in this really terrible matchup on the road against the Chiefs, because their defense has obviously been excellent and what's carried them to their undefeated record. So again, I would start Baker Mayfield above the extreme tertiary options that we discussed earlier. But if you have a really good option ahead of Baker Mayfield, I would start that person. It would depend who that person was. Like a Geno Smith, for example, actually this week, I would start Geno Smith. Matt Stafford, I think, are probably better options. Now, I'm not dropping Baker Mayfield unless it's a single quarterback league, because I will tell you, next week it's San Francisco and then a bye week. So for the next 3 weeks, if you don't need to hang on to a quarterback too in a single quarterback league, he is droppable, actually. But in Superflex, obviously, 2 quarterback, do not do that, please. For the wide receivers, I'm waiting until one of these guys actually emerges. I'm not messing with it. I actually like the running backs. I would start Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. If White gets injured, Sean Tucker will become relevant again. and Irving will stay relevant. I've said Bucky Irving is the one with kind of his own niche role in this offense where he is a flex play no matter what, but the other guy is viable too. And we've seen this across the NFL. There's successful running back tandems. I think it's becoming more of a thing. So again, whether that's Rachaad White or Sean Tucker, I'm okay with either one. But it's probably going to be Rachaad White this week, just so you know. And don't play Sean Tucker if you don't. Whoever the third guy, again, Sean Tucker is the third guy. So you can't, if Rachaad White is in, you cannot play Sean Tucker. If Rachaad White is out, you can play Sean Tucker. Regardless of which one of those guys is in or out, you can always play Bucky Irving. That's how that breaks down. For the Chiefs, Xavier Worthy, weekly dart throw for a touchdown. Sure, he can get it running through a gadget play or through the air. I actually think DeAndre Hopkins being on the field can help Xavier Worthy because we actually saw him have his success a little bit more when Rashee Rice was present. And I think, when you're a guy like a Xavier Worthy, you need a presence like a possession receiver like a Rashee Rice or a DeAndre Hopkins that's a true threat to kind of pull that coverage because that's what you need is that one step to beat a guy and, for them not to have that shell coverage all the time and to get that broken coverage. So if they start cheating down to DeAndre Hopkins, that's how that happens. Also, this being his second game now with the team, I would play DeAndre Hopkins over extreme options, right? So when I say extreme options, Packers wide receiver not named Jaden Reed, assuming that Jordan Love is out. So like Dontavian Wicks with Malik Willis at quarterback or DeAndre Hopkins, I'm playing DeAndre Hopkins. Greg Dortch or Michael Wilson versus DeAndre, I'm playing DeAndre Hopkins. So that's kind of the level. But if I have Colts wide receiver like Josh Downs and Michael Pittman, I'm playing them both above DeAndre Hopkins. So that's just to kind of give you an idea of where I'm at with that. And Kareem Hunt in this year of 2024 is now an every week starter at the running back position, which is crazy to say. And as gross as it's been, I mean, again, Kelsey kind of starting to find himself. Mahomes, the bare minimum is 15 points. So if you have a quarterback you think can score more than that, sure. You probably don't. You're stuck starting Mahomes. All right. Let's check out some of these questions. Jay, what's up? Hopkins, Dell, Myers, Shakir, pick one. I'm actually going to go with Khalil Shakir. He has the highest potential, I think. DeAndre Hopkins, we just finished talking about, yes, it's his second week with the team. Tank Dell feels like an all or nothing play. Jacoby Myers, gross PPR, Robitussin, but Khalil Shakir. And he caught 8 of 9 targets for 100 yards and a touchdown. It's a sweet matchup against Miami. It should be high scoring, divisional matchup. I like it a lot. I'm going with Khalil Shakir here. And then Hawk or Schultz. So see, shout out Joey Mickles. We were talking about this earlier with TJ Hawkinson. That's exactly the kind of level of tight end play I would have to have for me to just blindly say, you know what, I'm going to start TJ Hawkinson in his first week. And I know that they don't have Diggs and Nico Collins, and Schultz might see a bit more work. I'm taking the risk with Hawkinson because Schultz is just kind of gross. And yeah, I appreciate you stopping by. All right, let's get into our streaming options of the week, and then we can get on out of here and enjoy our Halloween.
Don't tell me. We're about to go over a huge water fountain.
Yep.
Sharp rocks at the bottom?
Most likely.
Bring it on.
Starting with the quarterbacks, Joe Flacco and Jameis Winston are going to be probably the two most popular streams that you can just easily grab off waivers. I think they're both good matchups. Flacco against the Vikings, who are kind of the NFC version of the Ravens, a little bit of a pass funnel there. And then the Jameis Winston effect for the Cleveland Browns. It's a home matchup against the Chargers, who are suddenly throwing the ball a lot more. So I like both those matchups. In deep super flex leagues, these are the desperation plays. Bryce Young, Mason Rudolph, assuming that he plays if Will Levis sits again, and Malik Willis. And I would actually rank that almost backwards of what I just said. I would actually rank it Malik Willis, Mason Rudolph, and then Bryce Young. No, flip those last two. Malik Willis, Bryce Young, Mason Rudolph. Final answer. Okay. Running backs. This is a gross one. This is a bad week for streaming running backs, but keep an eye on your waivers and who's been getting dropped. Devin Singletary may have been dropped, and if Tyrone Tracy does miss the week, you just need a gross Robitussin fill-in RB2. I think Devin Singletary is a viable play. I think Jaleel McLaughlin for the Denver Broncos on the road against the Ravens. Ravens are tough to run on. McLaughlin is obviously the pass-catching running back, so maybe he sees a little bit more work. He caught a touchdown last week. Maybe he can repeat that feat this week. He's worth a deep streaming option. Again, these are desperation RB2 plays. Talk about desperation. Miles Sanders against the New Orleans Saints had 7 receptions last week. Obviously, they're down bad at the wide receiver position. They may just end up leaning on Chuba and Miles Sanders in this one to get out of this as fast as possible. So again, if you're really just desperate for that RB2 play, Miles Sanders in really deep leagues, monitor Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. Tyjae Spears may have been dropped in a few leagues, and if Tony Pollard were to miss, Tyjae Spears can pick up that slack. I'm a known Tyjae Spears hater, but if he has the role to himself against the Patriots, I think that's a viable play. And again, deep vulture play. Roschon Johnson on the road against the Arizona Cardinals. I think he could just plunge into the end zone. For wide receiver, before I get into the actual plays, one of the things I was noticing and looking at is, and I'm, again, I've kind of talked about it earlier, selfishly as a Chicago Bears DJ Moore fantasy owner, the schedule for the Chicago Bears really lightens up over the next little while. Their next set of games at Arizona, and then home games against New England, Green Bay, Minnesota, then at Detroit, at San Francisco, at Minnesota, and then Detroit again and Seattle. So again, a lot of those are potentially high-flying matchups, some divisional matchups mixed in there. I think Roma Dunes is definitely worth a stash. I think he is someone that could, again, and we've seen this so many times where rookie wide receivers start to really emerge in the second half of a season. So along with Keon Coleman, who if he's out there should definitely be kind of owned and even played, I like Roma Dunes as a stash. I also like as deep, again, these are deep plays, Jalen Tolbert at Atlanta, Demarcus Robinson, bit my tongue there, Demarcus Robinson at Seattle, and even Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette versus New Orleans. Those are really deep streaming options for you 14 to 16 team leagues out there. And I like Adonai Mitchell as a deep stash too. I mentioned just because Joe Flacco should have that job for the rest of the year. I kind of want to just stash AD Mitchell and see if he doesn't emerge as a bigger part of this offense down the back half of the stretch. For the tight ends, Zach Ertz at the New York Giants, Hunter Henry at the Tennessee Titans, and Noah Fant versus the Los Angeles Rams. So Ertz at the Giants, bit of a tough matchup. May not be as much scoring, but it's a low floor volume play. Hunter Henry, I actually think is a better play against the Titans, but Noah Fant, assuming he's healthy and DK Metcalf misses, LA Rams are actually third they give up the third most fantasy points to the tight end position per Yahoo. Yahoo sucks, so take that with a grain of salt. But they're bad against tight end, is what I'm trying to say. So Noah Fant worth a deep flex option. And if T. Higgins misses, so is Mike Gesicki. Streaming defense. This is where we've really made our bones the last couple of weeks. We've been on fire with our streaming defensive plays this year. I think I usually do about 3 a week, and I think at least 2 per week have hit over 15 fantasy points. So we've been nailing these. New England is a very obvious defensive play if Levis starts. I don't like it as much if Mason Rudolph plays, but if they're crazy enough to go back to Will Levis, I will play the New England Patriots defense. I think because Jacoby Brissett is assumedly going to be starting this game again, I think the Tennessee Titans defense is also a great streaming play. If Derek Carr is active and playing, I think the New Orleans Saints defense is a strong play against the Carolina Panthers. I think, again, that one becomes less viable if it's the Rattler Snake and or sexy Jake Haener in at quarterback again. And then I also actually like, I think the Arizona Cardinals at home, that could be a surprising outcome where if Caleb Williams goes into Arizona and has another bad game, I wouldn't be completely shocked by that. And I could see the defense, having a good fantasy day. So if you're really hard up for a fantasy defense and you're looking for kind of a deeper option, I think all 3 of those plays are viable. All 4 of those plays, sorry. And hey, kickers are people too, guys. Blake Groupie for the New Orleans Saints on the road against the Carolina Panthers should have some easy opportunities. Jason Myers for the Seattle Seahawks will be at home against the LA Rams. That could be a high-scoring game, so I think he could have some good opportunities. And guys, Chase McLaughlin's just been a top 5 kicker the entire year and still somehow is on waivers in some leagues. Even though it's a tough matchup for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road against the Kansas City Chiefs, you assume that they will have some field goal kicking options and probably some longer ones. And he's been a closer, an absolute lock from, he's killing it from 50. So I love Chase McLaughlin. I've got him on a few teams. I think he deserves to be owned and streamed as a kicker. We got 2 more questions and then we'll knock on out of here. Donovan in the chat. Do you think Garrett Wilson and Devonta Smith for Puka is a good trade? Ooh. That depends. That depends so much on. So in a 2-for-1 deal like that, and you're giving up 2 good assets. I like Puka a lot, but I think Garrett Wilson and Devonta Smith are good wide receivers. Now, I like this deal, assuming that you're in a 10 to 12 man redraft and you have access to decent waivers, right? So I look at some of the guys that I picked up. If Josh Downs is somehow floating out there, if Keon Coleman is floating out there, if Roma Dunes, even Jordan Addison I saw got dropped in a shallower league. Again, talking about a 12-man redraft. If you're sitting and you're looking on waivers and you're like, oh, this really sweet asset that I would love to own is out there, and you can make this trade and pick up that guy, I would count that mentally in the trade, right? So as opposed to saying, I traded Garrett Wilson and Devonta Smith for Puka, it's okay, I traded Garrett Wilson and Devonta Smith for Puka, but then I picked up Jordan Addison. Let's just say that was the thing. So now it's okay, well, I traded Garrett Wilson and Devonta Smith for Puka and Jordan Addison. That sounds a little bit better already. Even if it was Puka and Keon Coleman or whoever. Unless you're in a 14-team, 16-team league, and you're going to be picking up fucking Pop Douglas, and now you're telling me I traded Garrett Wilson and Devonta Smith for Puka and Alec Pierce, okay, let's not take it too far. But again, Josh Downs, Again, shout out to fantasy footballers, but Josh Downs has been like top 5 in fantasy points per game when Joe Flacco has played. So like Josh Downs and Puka would be totally worth Garrett Wilson and Devonta Smith in a redraft to me. So again, depending on if you're in a 10 or 12 man and you have access to some decent waivers, fuck yeah, I would do this trade. And there's always injury risk, but it's like Devonta Smith is just as much an injury risk in my mind as Puka, and Garrett Wilson suffers from Aaron Rodgers ayahuasca syndrome. And our last question, hey, we just mentioned Captain Rodgers there. Would I start Tua, Caleb Williams, or Rodgers this week or tonight, I guess? I'm going with Tua there. I know it wasn't great last week, but it feels like last week was more of a moral victory, and maybe we see a little bit more from him. And it's just going to be such a high-scoring matchup, I think, with the Bills. I'm betting. And I know a lot of the fantasy community also is betting on a high-scoring matchup, so maybe we get let down a little bit. But my heart and my gut says Tua, because I think Caleb Williams could just as easily be the answer here. It's a road game against Arizona. I could see that going really, one of two ways, where he either has a really bad game or a really good game. But with Tua, I just feel like the only danger is if they lean on the running backs, but I do feel like this is going to be a good Tua game. I know the one I'm excluding is Rodgers. When you have a question like this, it's like, who's the guy I don't want? It's Aaron Rodgers. I'm maybe I'm a little reticent. I actually think Caleb Williams probably is the right answer. I think you consider the collection of weapons and the matchup. I think the potential for that Arizona matchup, even being on the road, going well for him, chances are probably, I would put it at like 55, 60% that it goes well for him as opposed to going bad. And those are pretty good odds. So I actually think that because Tua is still kind of maybe working his way back, if it was a home game for Miami, I'd be all over that. But I actually think I'm going to change my answer. Final answer here for Shades 721 is going to be Caleb Williams. And that is going to be how we sign off tonight. I super appreciate everybody stopping by. These are new names in the chat. So, man, I appreciate you guys stopping in and dropping your questions. We will be back Sunday morning at 9 a.m. for the question show. That's what I do every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. I jump on and answer all of your last minute questions. So feel free to come in and join us for that. But until the next time, I will catch all of you guys on the flip side. Oh, and happy Halloween.
He's running down the middle by the 50. He's at the 30. He's bare-chested and banging his chest. Now he runs the opposite way. He runs at the 50. He runs at the 40. The guy is drunk, but there he goes. The 20. They're chasing him. They're not going to get him. Waving his arms, bare-chested. Somebody stop that man. Here comes